The biggest lies are not told by strangers. They are told by the people who kiss you goodbye every morning and tell you they love you. Hannah Parker had no idea that by lunchtime, she would discover her husband had been hiding an entire life from her. The morning began like any other Tuesday in downtown Chicago. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and the streets below glittered with reflections from the glass towers that stretched toward the clouds. Hannah stepped out of a taxi holding a paper bag with Ethan's favorite grilled chicken sandwich and a large coffee with 2 packets of sugar. She smiled to herself as she crossed the plaza. Ethan had left home before sunrise again. Another meeting, another deadline, another excuse she barely questioned anymore. For 2 years she had believed her husband was a hard-working operations manager for a large company. Nothing glamorous. Nothing extraordinary. Just a good man who worked long hours and always came home exhausted. At least that was what she thought. The security guard in the lobby recognized her immediately. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Cole." Hannah smiled politely and adjusted the visitor badge hanging around her neck. "Just bringing my husband some lunch." The guard nodded and directed her toward the executive elevators. Hannah frowned. Executive elevators? That was strange. Ethan usually worked several floors lower. Before she could ask, a group of employees rushed into the lobby, forcing her to step aside. In the confusion, she entered the wrong elevator. The doors closed. The car rose higher and higher until it finally stopped near the top of the building. Hannah glanced at the display. 48th floor. She had never been here before. The hallway was silent, lined with dark wood panels and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It felt different from the busy office floors she knew. More exclusive. More important. She checked the room number Ethan had texted her earlier. Somehow it matched the corridor ahead. Maybe he had been moved to a new office. Shrugging, she walked forward. At the end of the hallway stood a large set of double doors. Through the frosted glass she could hear voices. She assumed it was a team meeting. Balancing the coffee carefully, she pushed the door open without knocking. The conversation stopped instantly. 20 people turned toward her. Men and women in tailored suits stared as though they had seen a ghost. Hannah froze. The room was enormous. A massive screen covered one wall. Charts, financial projections, and company logos filled the display. Then her eyes found Ethan. He wasn't sitting among the employees. He was standing at the front of the room. And behind him, projected in giant letters nearly 3 feet tall, were words that made her heart stop. Ethan Cole, Chief Executive Officer. For a moment she forgot how to breathe. The coffee slipped slightly in her hand. The room remained silent. Every executive at the table slowly rose to their feet. Not for her. For him. Ethan's face lost all color. "Hannah," he said quietly. But Hannah barely heard him. Because in that single moment she realized the man she married was not who she thought he was at all. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound Hannah could hear was the faint hum of the projector and the pounding of her own heartbeat. For what felt like an eternity, she stood frozen in the doorway holding a paper bag and a cup of coffee while 20 executives stared at her, as if she had stepped into a room where she was never supposed to be. Ethan took a slow breath and stepped away from the screen. His expensive suit, the one she had never seen before, suddenly seemed to belong to a completely different man. "Hannah," he said again, his voice calm but strained. "Can we talk?" She looked at him, then at the giant letters behind him. Chief Executive Officer. The words felt unreal. "You are the CEO?" she asked quietly. Several people around the table exchanged nervous glances. Ethan nodded once. Hannah let out a small laugh, not because anything was funny, but because her mind could not process what she was seeing. "You told me you managed operations." Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but she shook her head. "You told me you work long hours because your department was understaffed. You told me the business trips were routine. You told me." Her voice faded. Suddenly dozens of memories rushed through her mind. The late-night phone calls he always took in another room. The luxury car service that occasionally dropped him off a block away from their apartment. The expensive watch she once found and assumed belonged to a client. The way restaurant managers always seemed to know his name. The way strangers sometimes stared at him. She had explained every clue away because she trusted him. "Mrs. Cole," one executive finally said with an awkward smile, "perhaps this is not the best place for this discussion." Hannah looked around the room and realized every person there was waiting for Ethan to react. Not one of them appeared surprised by his title. The only person who had been left in the dark was her. Ethan glanced at the board members. "Let us take a 15-minute break." Instantly chairs moved. Laptops closed. Conversations began in hushed whispers. Within moments the room was nearly empty. Hannah remained standing near the door. Ethan approached carefully, as though one wrong word might make her disappear. "I wanted to tell you," he said. "When?" she asked. "Before our wedding? After our wedding? Last month? This morning?" Ethan lowered his eyes. The silence answered for him. Hannah felt something twist painfully inside her chest. It was not anger about money. It was not shock about wealth. It was the realization that the person she trusted most had hidden something enormous from her every single day of their marriage. Ethan reached for her hand. "Please let me explain everything." Hannah stepped back before he could touch her. For the first time since she met him, she did not know whether she was looking at her husband or a stranger. And deep down, she feared the answer might change everything. Hannah left the conference room without another word. She could hear Ethan calling her name behind her, but the sound seemed distant, drowned out by the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. The elevator ride down felt longer than the entire 2 years of their marriage. Every floor that passed seemed to peel away another layer of the life she thought she knew. By the time she stepped onto the busy Chicago sidewalk, the city looked different. The towering glass building behind her was no longer just Ethan's workplace. It was the headquarters of an empire. And somehow, she had never known. Her phone buzzed. "Ethan." She declined the call. It rang again. She declined it a second time. A third call followed. This time she powered the phone off completely and slipped it into her purse. She needed silence. She needed space. Most of all, she needed answers. An hour later, Hannah sat alone on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan. The wind carried the scent of water across the shoreline as sailboats drifted in the distance. Usually this place brought her peace. Today it only brought memories. Small moments she had ignored now replayed with startling clarity. The weekend trip Ethan had cancelled because of an emergency meeting. The charity gala invitation addressed to him that he claimed had been sent by mistake. The elderly couple at a restaurant who had thanked him for saving hundreds of jobs. At the time she thought he was helping with a community project. Now she wondered how many clues had been sitting in plain sight. Her thoughts drifted back even further, to the day they first met. 2 years earlier, a cold spring rain had swept through Chicago unexpectedly. Hannah had ducked into a small independent bookstore near Lincoln Park to escape the weather. She remembered shaking water from her umbrella and wandering through the crowded aisles while waiting for the storm to pass. That was where she saw him. Ethan stood near the history section reaching for the same book she wanted. Their hands brushed briefly. Both apologized at the same time. Both laughed. It was such a simple moment that neither of them could have known it would change their lives. He had seemed ordinary then. No designer suit. No security detail. No hint of extraordinary wealth. Just a kind man with warm eyes and an easy smile. They spent nearly an hour talking between shelves lined with worn paperbacks. By the time the rain stopped, either wanted the conversation to end. Looking back now, Hannah realized something unsettling. Everything she had fallen in love with had been real. His kindness. His patience. His sense of humor. The way he remembered every small detail she shared. None of those things had been a lie. Yet somehow the biggest truth of all had remained hidden. As the afternoon sun dipped lower across the water, Hannah stared toward the horizon and asked herself the question she feared most. If Ethan had hidden something this large from her, what else did she not know? While Hannah sat beside the lake trying to make sense of her shattered reality, Ethan remained alone in his corner office high above the city. For the first time in years, quarterly reports, acquisitions, and board meetings meant absolutely nothing to him. The conference room had eventually filled again, executives returning to their seats and waiting for direction, but Ethan had ended the meeting early. No one questioned the decision. Everyone could see something far more important was unfolding. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago and stared at the same skyline Hannah was probably looking at somewhere below. The difference was that she saw a city. He saw a mistake he had been avoiding for 2 years. His phone rested on the desk beside him. 7 unanswered calls. 3 unanswered messages. Not a single response from Hannah. Ethan closed his eyes. He had always known this day might come. He just never imagined it would happen like this. The truth was that Ethan had spent most of his adult life surrounded by people who cared more about his title than the person behind it. Investors wanted access. Business partners wanted influence. Strangers wanted opportunities. Even friendships often came with hidden expectations. Then, 3 years earlier, his engagement had ended after he discovered the woman he planned to marry was more interested in the fortune attached to his name than the future they were supposed to build together. The experience left scars he rarely spoke about. It also left him deeply afraid. When he met Hannah in that bookstore, everything felt different. She never asked what kind of car he drove. She never asked how much money he made. She never seemed impressed by status or power. She cared about people. She cared about students. She cared about art programs being cut from schools and families struggling to pay bills. For the first time in years, Ethan felt seen as a man instead of a CEO. And so he made a decision that had seemed harmless at the time. He would keep his position private until he was certain their relationship was real. Then weeks became months. Months became years. Every time he wanted to tell her, fear convinced him to wait a little longer. There was always another reason. Another opportunity. Another perfect moment that never arrived. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. His assistant Claire stepped inside carrying a tablet. Unlike most employees, Claire had known Ethan long before he became chief executive officer. She studied his expression carefully. She found out. It was not a question. Ethan nodded. Claire sighed quietly. You should have told her. Ethan managed a faint smile. I know. Claire hesitated before speaking again. The board is already talking about it. Ethan turned toward her. Talking about what? About the fact that nobody knew you were married. She placed the tablet on his desk. Several financial news websites were already publishing articles. Anonymous sources had leaked information from the meeting. Headlines were spreading across the internet. Ethan stared at the screen as a feeling of dread settled in his chest. Because he knew something Hannah did not. The moment the public learned who she was, their private life would never be private again. The next morning, Hannah woke up on the pull-out couch in her friend Megan's apartment, after barely sleeping. The events of the previous day replayed in her mind with painful clarity. For a few brief moments after opening her eyes, she almost convinced herself it had been a strange dream. Then she saw the dozens of missed calls on her phone and remembered everything. Ethan. The boardroom. The lies. The headlines. She sat up slowly and opened one of the news articles. Her stomach tightened immediately. There was her husband standing outside company headquarters. There was the company logo. And there, beside the article, was a photograph of her walking out of the building. The image had clearly been taken without her knowledge. Another headline called her the mysterious wife of one of America's most influential executives. Another speculated that she had secretly married into a billion-dollar fortune. Another questioned why the marriage had been hidden from investors. Hannah closed the screen and placed the phone face down. It felt as if strangers were discussing her life without knowing a single thing about her. Across the room, Megan emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Hannah before sitting beside her. You look exhausted. Hannah managed a weak smile. I feel exhausted. Megan hesitated. Have you talked to him? Hannah shook her head. I do not even know what I would say. Megan was quiet for a moment. Do you still love him? The question caught Hannah off guard. She stared into her coffee. The answer came instantly. Yes. That was the problem. Despite everything, despite the confusion and hurt, she still loved the man she met in that bookstore. She still loved the man who brought her flowers for no reason and remembered every student's name from her classroom stories. She still loved the man who sat through school art shows and applauded every child as if they were world-famous artists. The feelings had never disappeared. But trust was different. Trust had cracks now. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed again. This time it was not Ethan. It was an unknown number. Reluctantly, Hannah answered. Mrs. Cole? A professional voice asked. This is Claire Bennett from Cole Dynamics. Hannah recognized the name immediately. Ethan's assistant. What is it? She asked cautiously. Claire sounded uncomfortable. I think there is something you should know. Several board members are using yesterday's situation to pressure Ethan. They believe the public reaction could weaken his position. Hannah frowned. What does that have to do with me? There was a brief pause. More than you realize. After the call ended, Hannah sat silently staring out the apartment window. For the first time, she realized this was no longer only about a marriage. Forces much larger than either of them were beginning to move. And somewhere inside a boardroom high above Chicago, people were already deciding whether Ethan's biggest secret might become the reason he lost everything. 3 days later, the tension inside Cole Dynamics had only grown worse. Ethan sat at the head of a long conference table while board members debated around him. Some supported him. Others clearly did not. At the far end of the room sat Victor Cole, Ethan's uncle and one of the company's largest shareholders. Victor had spent years waiting for an opportunity to challenge Ethan's leadership, and now he finally had one. Investors are nervous, Victor said calmly. The media is asking questions. The company cannot afford uncertainty. Ethan knew exactly what he meant. This was not about investors. This was about power. Victor wanted control of the company, and the hidden marriage had given him ammunition. Meanwhile, Hannah tried to return to normal life. She went back to the elementary school where she taught art, hoping routine would quiet the noise surrounding her. Instead, she found reporters waiting outside the building. Cameras followed her as she walked toward the entrance. Questions flew from every direction. Did you know your husband was worth billions? Are you planning to stay married? Did you sign a prenuptial agreement? Hannah lowered her head and hurried inside. Her classroom had always been a safe place. Bright paintings covered the walls. Children's drawings filled every corner. Usually the room made her smile. Today it felt different. Even here, the outside world seemed to be creeping in. During lunch, she sat alone grading assignments when the school principal entered quietly. You have a visitor. Hannah looked up. Her heart immediately tightened. Ethan stood in the doorway holding a small brown paper bag. The same kind of bag she had carried into that conference room days earlier. For several seconds neither spoke. Finally Ethan stepped forward. I brought lunch. Hannah stared at him. You cannot just show up here. I know. His voice was softer than she remembered. But I needed to see you. The room fell silent again. Ethan placed the bag on her desk. You have every right to be angry. Hannah looked away. You do not understand. I am not angry because you are rich. Then what is it? Ethan asked. Hannah swallowed hard. Because every memory I have is suddenly attached to a question. Every conversation. Every story. Every explanation. I keep wondering what was real and what was not. Ethan's expression fell. Those words hurt more than any headline. Because he knew she was asking the one question he could not easily answer. Before he could respond, Hannah's phone buzzed. A news alert appeared across the screen. Both of them read the headline at the same time. Major shareholders prepare emergency vote on Coal Dynamics leadership. Ethan's face darkened instantly. Hannah looked up. For the first time, she realized the danger was becoming real. Someone was actively trying to remove him from the company he had spent his life building. Over the next week, the story spread far beyond Chicago. Financial blogs, television networks, and social media accounts all seemed fascinated by the same question. Who was Hannah Cole? Unfortunately, curiosity quickly turned into speculation. Anonymous posts began appearing online. Some claimed she had deliberately targeted Ethan. Others insisted she had known about his wealth from the beginning. Complete strangers dissected photographs of their relationship, inventing stories from moments they did not understand. Hannah tried to ignore it, but the rumors followed her everywhere. One afternoon, as she left school carrying a stack of student artwork, two parents stopped talking the moment she walked past. Another teacher awkwardly changed the subject when she entered the faculty lounge. Nobody was openly rude, yet she could feel the difference. The attention was exhausting. Meanwhile, inside Coal Dynamics, Victor continued building support for the upcoming shareholder vote. He appeared on business programs presenting himself as a concerned investor focused on stability. Publicly, he remained respectful toward Ethan. Privately, he was far less patient. During one board meeting, Victor placed a folder on the table and slid it towards several directors. Inside were dozens of printed headlines about Ethan's hidden marriage. Leadership requires transparency, Victor said calmly. Investors deserve better. Ethan remained silent, but he understood exactly what was happening. Victor was not attacking his business decisions. He was attacking his credibility. Back at Megan's apartment, Hannah received an unexpected visitor. Claire stood outside carrying a large envelope. Hannah almost did not answer the door, but curiosity won. "I am sorry to bother you," Claire said, "but I think you should see this." Inside the envelope were company documents, photographs, and newspaper clippings. Hannah frowned. "What is all this?" Claire sat across from her. "The history nobody ever talks about." For the next hour, Hannah learned things Ethan had never shared. She discovered how he had spent years rebuilding struggling factories instead of shutting them down. She learned about scholarship programs he personally funded. She saw letters from employees whose families had been helped during difficult times. There were no press releases attached. No publicity campaigns. Most of the donations had remained anonymous. "Why are you showing me this?" Hannah asked quietly. Claire looked at her carefully. "Because everyone is talking about the secret he kept from you. Nobody is talking about the person he really is." Hannah stared at a photograph showing Ethan visiting a community center years earlier. He looked exactly the same as the man she met in the bookstore. The same smile. The same eyes. The same warmth. For the first time since discovering the truth, a painful realization settled into her heart. Perhaps Ethan had hidden his title. Perhaps he had made a terrible mistake. But the man she fell in love with had never actually disappeared. As Hannah closed the folder, her phone buzzed with a breaking news alert. The emergency shareholder vote had been moved forward. Ethan now had only 5 days before the future of his company would be decided. The countdown to the shareholder vote seemed to accelerate everything. Every news outlet wanted a statement. Every analyst had an opinion. And every hour brought a new rumor. Hannah tried to focus on her students, but even the classroom could not completely shield her from what was happening. Late one afternoon, after the last child had left and the hallways had grown quiet, she sat alone organizing paint supplies when her phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown sender. Attached was a photograph. Hannah opened it and immediately felt her stomach drop. The image showed Ethan sitting at a restaurant table with a woman she did not recognize. Another photograph followed. Then another. The angle made them appear intimate. The final message contained a simple sentence. "Are you sure you ever knew your husband?" Hannah stared at the screen. Something about the images felt wrong. Not because she trusted Ethan completely again. She did not. But because the timing seemed too convenient. Within minutes another message arrived from a different number. This time it contained a link to a financial blog publishing the same photographs. The article claimed Ethan had hidden multiple relationships while secretly maintaining his marriage. Hannah closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair. Someone was trying very hard to destroy him. The question was why. That evening she called Claire. "Do you know who the woman is?" Hannah asked. Claire did not even need to see the photographs. "Yes. Her name is Rebecca Lang. She is an attorney who worked on a merger 6 months ago. Those pictures were taken during business meetings." Hannah frowned. "Then why are they being released now?" There was silence on the other end. Finally Claire answered. "Because someone wants Ethan to lose the vote." The pieces began fitting together. The headlines. The leaks. The rumors. The pressure from investors. None of it felt random anymore. Later that night, Hannah found herself unable to sleep. She opened the folder Claire had given her and began reviewing every document more carefully. Near the bottom she discovered a report mentioning several board members who had quietly increased their shares over the past year. One name appeared repeatedly. Victor Cole. Hannah's eyes narrowed. She remembered the confidence in his interviews and the way he always spoke as though leadership changes were inevitable. The more she read, the more uncomfortable she became. Shortly after midnight, her phone rang unexpectedly. Claire sounded anxious. "Hannah, I need to tell you something." "What happened?" Hannah asked. "We just learned that Victor has secured enough tentative votes to remove Ethan if nothing changes before Friday." Hannah stood up immediately. "How close is it?" Claire hesitated. "Closer than anyone expected." After the call ended, Hannah stared out the apartment window at the Chicago skyline glowing against the night sky. 4 days she had focused on her own hurt and confusion. But now a different realization was beginning to take shape. Someone had carefully engineered this crisis. And if she did nothing, Ethan might lose far more than his title. He might lose the company he had spent his entire life building. The following morning, Hannah made a decision she never expected to make. She called Ethan. The line connected almost immediately, as if he had been waiting beside his phone. For a moment neither spoke. Then Ethan's voice came quietly. "Hannah." Hearing her name in his voice brought back memories she had spent days trying to ignore. "I think someone is targeting you," she said. There was a long pause. "I know. And I think it is bigger than the marriage story." Another pause followed. "I know that too." Hannah looked out the window. "Then why are you letting it happen?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "Because every time I try to defend myself, the story gets worse. And because I deserve some of the criticism." Hannah closed her eyes. Even now he was blaming himself. They agreed to meet that evening at the small bookstore where everything had started. When Hannah arrived, the familiar scent of old paper and coffee instantly transported her back 2 years. Ethan was already there waiting near the history section. The same place where their hands had reached for the same book. For the first time in days, neither title nor fortune stood between them. Just two people carrying hurt. They sat in a quiet corner and talked for hours. Ethan answered every question she asked. No excuses. No evasions. He told her about the fear that had followed him after his broken engagement. He admitted that what began as hesitation eventually became cowardice. Hannah listened carefully. Some answers helped. Others hurt. But for the first time since the truth came out, she felt like she was hearing the real Ethan again. As they prepared to leave, Claire called. Her voice sounded urgent. "You both need to see this immediately." 20 minutes later they were sitting in a conference room reviewing documents Claire had obtained from an internal source. The evidence was shocking. Emails showed Victor had been coordinating media leaks for weeks before the boardroom incident ever happened. Additional messages suggested he planned to use the marriage controversy to influence investors and board members. Hannah stared at the screen in disbelief. He planned all of this? Claire nodded grimly. Not everything. But he was prepared to exploit any opportunity. Ethan remained silent. The betrayal clearly cut deeper than he wanted to admit. Victor was family. Yet the documents revealed a strategy built entirely around removing him. Hannah continued reading until she found one final message. Her eyes widened. Ethan. He looked up. She turned the screen toward him. The email referenced a confidential shareholder presentation scheduled for the morning of the vote. Attached to it was a plan to publicly blame Hannah for damaging investor confidence. The room fell silent. Claire looked horrified. Ethan's jaw tightened. Hannah stared at the evidence and felt something change inside her. For days she had been standing on the sidelines trying to decide whether she could trust her husband again. But now someone was preparing to destroy both of them. And for the first time